Hello. Hi. It's April in the exact same outfit as the last video because I filmed this at the same time as that other video because I thought that I would be able to make this into one video. Alas, the runtime got real long, so I am breaking it into actually 3. Alina, Mal, this video, and the Darkling. Each are going to get their own videos about me breaking down how their character was portrayed in the TV show Netflix's Shadow and Bone versus the books of Shadow and Bone. So welcome in. My name is April. This is High Fantasy Writing, and let's jump into some analysis about the adaptation Netflix just came out with about the Shadow and Bone series. Now we are on to Malyen Oretzev, the expert tracker, who I liked a lot better from the books than a lot of people did. So, when I read the books, did I think Mal was the greatest character I had ever read? No. Did I feel like he was the greatest love interest for Alina that Bardugo could have possibly come up with? No. Did I feel like he had a lot more depth that could have been explored? Yes. But I felt that way for like all of the characters in the Shadow and Bone trilogy, so it's not like Mal was just like, I'm just scrambling for straws trying to have this character that was so much worse in the books than everybody else and trying to defend him. I felt like every single character in the Shadow and Bone trilogy books was pretty shallow and pretty, like, not well developed at all. So what I'm saying about Alina and Mal, the Darkling, and all the side characters is with the underlying knowledge that I didn't feel like any of these characters were fleshed out that much, so this is just my interpretation of what was given to us. So most of the people who have read the books and then watched the show, I feel like there's a consensus that they feel like Mal is the character that they changed the most from the books to the show adaptation. I disagree. I just feel like we didn't get a very in-depth view of Mal in the books. All of the factual aspects are there. Mal caring about Alina, Mal hanging out with Alina and being an important person in her life, Mal going and hunting the stag so that he could help Alina out and go to the little palace and see Alina to make sure that she's okay. That all was text in the book. But because we only saw things from Alina's point of view, and so much of that story happened away from Alina, we never actually got to experience it with Mal, which I feel like is one of the reasons why he falls flatter in the books than characters like, say, I can say this without cringing, then say Nikolai, where much of Nikolai's story is around Alina. He and Alina have much more page time together than Alina and Mal do, especially in the first 2 books. In another video, I will discuss my feelings about Nikolai. I do not feel like getting into them right now. So, Mal. Back to Mal. So Mal has a lot of his character development and depth happen away from Alina, which, since we're in Alina's point of view in the books, we do not actually get to see. Thankfully, the show changed that, and all of these little one-line things that we get in the book, we actually get to experience and see through entire episodes, namely his hunt for the stag, which affects him a great deal, because in the books we learn that that is the first time he has ever killed anyone, and his two closest army friends are killed because of the mission that he takes them on. That is a lot that really should have been shown in the books. Like, you can't just give a paragraph about, oh yeah, we were caught north of the Fjorden border searching for the stag. Dubrov and Mikhail didn't make it out. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Like, that does not do the trauma of that experience justice, and thankfully they changed that in the show. In my opinion, in my view of how they portrayed Mal in the books versus the TV show, the basics of Mal's story and who he is don't change. There are a few notable exceptions that I feel the writers of the show just tossed in because they had heard the complaints about Mal, and so they wanted to make it explicitly clear that he was not what people were accusing him of being. But largely, his story is exactly the same, and who he is as a character is exactly the same. We just get to see it through his own eyes and experience it with him, rather than only seeing it through Alina's eyes and after the fact, because Alina wasn't there when all these things happened to Mal. Because the books are from Alina's point of view, and Alina is so self-depreciating, she thinks that Mal is just going around sleeping with every girl in the army, that he went and slept with Zoya because, he stared at a pretty girl as she rode by on a carriage. Like, oh wow, he's totally a bad guy for that. But we learn in later books that he didn't. He actually didn't sleep with anybody before, being with Alina. He may have flirted with people, he may have been friends with people, but he never romantically attached himself to anyone, because, as we learn, he cared about Alina. He wasn't interested in any other people, any other romantic prospects. He liked Alina, which isn't obsessive or dependent like some people think. In the books, they're 17 years old. I didn't have my first boyfriend until I was 16. So it's not like he was just rejecting people, because of some obsession with Alina. It's just some people don't date around. They choose the person who they like, and that's who they like. And they're not interested in casual flings. And it's okay if you are interested in casual flings, but it's also realistic if you're not. So, seeing only from Alina's point of view, I think that people ignored the reveal later on in the series that Mal actually didn't sleep around with people, and they just let the first impression that Alina gave us of Mal, that he did sleep around with other people and didn't care about Alina at all until she got powers. I think they just held on to that first impression and ignored any evidence to the contrary. We see so little of Mal that the brief flashes that we do get in the book, well, they don't start out very good. We see Alina being self-depreciating, and even though Mal is hanging out with her and saying how much, she's his friend and stuff, and how he wants to, protect her as they're going into the Shadowfold, Alina internal monologue is just, oh my god, he doesn't care about me. He just, like, thinks of me as this annoying little friend. Even though that's textually not what's happening, because we only see it from Alina's point of view. That's what we as the readers get. And then the next time we see him, he's yelling at her in the little palace. Which I will get to, that I feel like he is completely justified in becoming angry at her when he sees her in the little palace. That's a little bit later. And then in the book, we don't get much time after that before Mal and Alina are kissing and they've completely made up and they've declared their love for each other. I think that what the show did really great is that they did not have Mal and Alina kiss in the first season. I thought that that was a very good decision because it did kind of feel like in the book that Alina was just making out with the Darkling, had completely given up on Mal and tossed him out of her life. And then the moment he shows back up again, she finds out the Darkling is actually evil. Surprise. Then immediately she's making out with Mal now. So I do appreciate that the show took a slower burn approach to their relationship. I feel like that's definitely going to strengthen it. But in the book, because we don't see Mal away from Alina, the brief glances that we do get don't always paint him in the best light. My next soapbox is going to be about the infamous Mal being angry at Alina in the little palace because Alina seems happy and is wearing the Darkling's colors scene. That a lot of people point to say, see, Mal is bad and toxic and, like, controlling and misogynistic. I don't view this scene the way a lot of other people do. Because I was at an age when I read this story, I was able to separate myself from the fantasy of, you know, I am secretly super important, I've been plucked from obscurity, I have this great power, and now I'm in a place where everybody adores me and dotes on me phase. Like, I was able to separate myself from that desire when reading. So when I read how Mal was extremely concerned when he saw his closest friend in an abusive, controlling relationship, I saw it that way. Did Mal handle the situation in a perfect manner? No. But that's kind of what makes good characters, is that they're not perfect. They may be well-intentioned, they may have justifiable reasons for blowing up at somebody, but that doesn't mean that they should have blown up at them. Like, the emotions of fear and concern are very real, and I feel like if we had followed Mal through the books as well as Alina, the readers would have been able to really see his point of view as he sees Alina in the little palace for the first time. In the book and in the show, everybody in Ravka looks at the Darkling as a villain. He says so himself multiple times through the show. Whenever they see him, they don't see a solution, they just see a continuation and a reminder of the problem. He will always be the scapegoat for their anger, for their fear, and we find out that's justified. He literally is the reason that the fold is there. He is the reminder that the fold is there, that the Volcra exist, that the nation is in so much turmoil. So everyone in the book and the show who are outside of the little palace agree that the Darkling is a bad guy. He is not good. He is scary, he is powerful, he is ruthless, he is, you know, the scary tyrant general of this all-powerful army that could murder everybody if he wanted to. All of these are accurate assessments of the Darkling. So, when Mal sees Alina being kidnapped by this person, because especially in the show, we get to see that Alina was banging on the carriage windows, like screaming for Mal. Like, he saw that she was being taken under duress. She did not want to leave, and especially didn't want to leave without having talked to him. So he knows that his best friend has just been taken against her will to a place full of people who have always looked down on people like himself and Alina, and people who are super powerful and under the direct care of the Darkling, who everyone in Ravka is uncomfortable around. Add this to the fact that he is pretty sure that Alina would be trying to write to him. He is actively trying to write to her, and yet no letters are getting back to him. It is very understandable that he would think something terrible has happened to her. I mean, this is another aspect of where I think Bardugo really got the realism of the situation right and didn't just wash away the relationships you have with people outside of your fantasy magic school that a lot of people, I feel like, wanted her to. Like, they wanted to just be like, oh yeah, never mind, everything after, like, everything before the magic school doesn't matter anymore, we can just ignore it. I feel like Bardugo did a really good job of putting you realistically in that situation. If your closest friend was kidnapped and then you didn't hear from them at all, you asked people who would be in the place that she's at. He asks different Grisha who are stationed with the First Army. He's like, hey, can I get a message to Alina? Do you know how Alina is doing? They literally laugh at him and tell him to go away. If you are in that position and your closest friend has been kidnapped, you try to ask about their well-being and you are laughed out of the room and not told how your closest friend is, would you just be like, nah, okay, well, time to find a new friend, because I'm just gonna forget about them and let whatever terrible thing might happen to them happen. Whatever. Is that how you actually would react? Because if that is, then I don't want to be your friend. Like, isn't the whole heroic thing that we see in stories from the protagonist is that their friend is captured and the protagonist is the great hero and at great risk to themselves goes off on an adventure to try and get back to their friend and make sure their friend is safe? Isn't that the heroic thing to do? Apparently not when it's Mal. Why? I have my suspicions, but I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I have my suspicions it's because they think that the Darkling is hot and they want Alina with the Darkling, and so everything Mal does is wrong and bad, and if he dares questions Darklina's supremacy, then he is bad and evil and should die. If that's not how you feel, then I'm not talking to you. But if that is how you feel, and I know there are people out there who feel exactly that way, that's for you. Is it incredibly realistic for Mal to see his closest friend be kidnapped and want to go and make sure that she is safe? So he goes off and he hunts the stag, he finds it, and he is bringing the information to the little palace so that he can finally see his friend that he is afraid is being tortured, he is afraid is being mistreated and used and just not in the best situation. Which, coinkadinkly, she is not in the best situation. She is being abused. She is being manipulated. She is being controlled. So he's right. For some reason, people just gloss over that fact that Mal is 100% right about what's happening to her. A gilded cage is still a cage. They are controlling Alina. They are intending to use her as a tool for their own purposes, which we later find out to be our evil purposes. So Mal is 100% right that she's in a bad situation. So when he sees her with an abuser, the Darkling, in his colors, yeah, he kind of freaks out. That's, to me, a reasonable reaction. Is it the best reaction? No. Should you try to actually be empathetic to the person in the abusive relationship and not attack them for it? Yes. But, I mean, if you see your closest friend in an abusive relationship and they look like they have just fully embraced the abuser and the abusive situation and are being controlled and, you know, manipulated and treated terribly, it's reasonable that you would get really upset and call them out on it. And it's actually a good thing to have friends who will look you in the face and say, hey, these choices that you're making, the situation you're in, it's a bad one. It's a really bad one. Especially since from Mal's point of view, everyone knows the Darkling is a bad person. Everyone knows that the little palace is a manipulative, controlling place where people come out of the little palace not caring about anybody but fellow Grisha. This is a known fact of the world. So Mal being upset at seeing his friend in an abusive relationship and flipping out about it is a realistic reaction. It's not a controlling reaction. It's not a misogynistic reaction. It's a reasonable concern for him. This is especially clear when you factor in Bardugo's comments about the Darkling and Alina's relationship being an abusive one. She wanted to specifically let readers know that this is an abusive relationship, not like some, oh, well, it's totally okay if you ship Malina or Darklina. They're both equally healthy relationships. That is not the situation we're in. So people acting as though it is just being disingenuous. You can ship whatever you want. Like, you can have all of the fanfic that you want. But to say that a character calling out the abusive, toxic relationship is actually toxic in himself, that you need to fix your reading comprehension skills. Bardugo said of the Darkling, let me quote, "It almost became this challenge where I was going to keep him as compelling, charismatic, and attractive as possible because I don't believe the people that are the most dangerous to us are devoid of these qualities. They're the people who enter our lives who are broken and beautiful, but they are still bad news." That is how Bardugo wanted to portray the Darkling and Alina's relationship. And having a character in the story give voice to that doesn't make that character an abuser in himself. It doesn't make him a misogynist. It makes him a caring friend. And now I am done with my soapbox sword and shield defending of Malyen Oretzev from the books. And we can move on to how Mal was portrayed in the show. I think the show did a really great job of showing all of these aspects of Mal in a neutral light that brought a lot of book readers who didn't like Mal over to my view of Mal, and that he was not obsessive and abusive and toxic and misogynistic. He was actually just a really good friend who went through a whole lot of terrible things. I mean, even before Alina was taken to the little palace, being in the army and being a grunt in the army is not a great place to be. That, seeing him in those situations added so much to his character. We actually got to see him go up and hunt for the stag. We got to actually see him write the letters to Alina, which you wouldn't even know he had done if you had not found this special copy of Shadow and Bone and then flipped all the way to the end, where apparently there are Mal's letters to Alina's. Apparently I didn't get that version of the book from my library, or I didn't know to flip past the acknowledgments and everything to search for these letters to Alina. So I had no idea that this was even a thing. But thankfully the show showed us all of that. Really interesting to actually watch reactors as they see Alina and Mal interacting in the first episode, because I've seen a lot of reactors actually taking the opposite view of what is pushed in the books. So in the books, readers are led to believe through Alina's point of view that Alina is just head over heels pining after Mal, and Mal doesn't care about her at all. But in the show, the reactors actually feel like it's the opposite, that Mal is the one who's clearly madly in love with Alina, and Alina is just kind of like, yeah, you're my friend, cool. So it's really interesting seeing that flipped in the show, where people are actually seeing Mal's point of view, because later in the books we see that that's how Mal had always felt about Alina. Just because Alina didn't see it herself didn't mean it wasn't actually there. So seeing reactors who hadn't read the books actually thinking that Mal was the one who was enamored with Alina and had some unrequited love stuff was actually kind of entertaining, because it just kind of flipped everything on its head. The reason that Mal comes across so much better in the show is a very important writing technique, in that showing versus telling is much, much more impactful on the audience and engenders much more sympathy and empathy in the audience for a character than just saying, oh, this is a really good guy who has done a lot of stuff to get back with his girl. That's not as impactful as seeing it happen. Seeing him write those letters, seeing him go after the stag, seeing him lose his friends, seeing him argue with his commanding officer and say, no, I need to be the one to go to the little palace to share the news. That engenders much more empathy for a character than just saying, he's a good guy, you should like him. Because clearly that did not work for a lot of readers of the books. Seeing through Mal's eyes also gave us a great broadening of the Grishaverse world, especially seeing how the First Army operates and is treated by the Grisha. The First Army wasn't a very big thing in the books, because we saw Alina in the First Army so little. It was really only the first chapter that Alina was part of the First Army. But seeing it through Mal's eyes, we actually got to see the struggle between the First and Second Armies, how the Grisha are held in such higher value than regular Opkazatia, and how their lives are valued way more than the First Army lives are. So the little monologue with the commander of the First Army in Novosibirsk, where the commander general, whatever title he has, was talking about how, they told us the Grisha were worth 24 men, or maybe it starts at 50 regular soldiers, and then technological advancements happened, and now they're worth 24 of us. Then more technological advancements happened, and they're worth 10 of one of us. I mean, one of them is worth 10 of us. You know what I'm saying. that was a really great way to world build, to get the watcher thinking about what the future might hold for the Second Army. If technology continues to advance, will they become obsolete? Will they no longer be the threatening force that they are? And actually seeing those struggles of regular people instead of only seeing things from the Little Palace's point of view helps viewers to see that the Little Palace isn't this paradise that some people viewed it when they just read the books. They can actually get to see that the Little Palace is kind of filled with terrible people, with terrible policies of treating Kazatia as less than they are, which is, problematic and should probably be addressed. Some of the scenes that they explicitly changed for Mal from the book to the show is that they completely cut the scene where he blows up at Alina for getting close to the Darkling. They actually specifically address it in the show, where Alina drops Alexander as the Darkling's name. Mal is like, who's Alexander? And then Alina feels like she needs to tell him how close she and General Kerrigan had gotten. Mal cuts her off and says, you don't have to justify your actions to me. You don't have to explain anything. I'm just glad that you're here now. And I feel like that was an acceptable way to address the situation. Since he didn't see her when they were in the Little Palace, it doesn't, and when that exchange happens, they're already away from the Little Palace. Alina has already figured out that she was in a terrible situation, and so it wouldn't have made sense for him to blow up at her. In that situation, he blew up at her in the book because she wasn't recognizing that she was in an abusive situation. So he was angry and concerned that his friend was in an abusive situation that she seemed to want to continue being in. In the show, she's already out of it, so it wouldn't have really made sense for him to have blown up at her. So it's a good way to appease the people who didn't enjoy him blowing up her in the books, and to kind of say, this Mal is different. I personally do, for those reasons, like the way the Netflix show handled it better than the books, but I'm a little afraid that Netflix's insistence, okay, how do I want to word this? So I feel like Netflix is very conscious of how the fandom views Mal, and so I feel like they are afraid to make Mal have any flaws whatsoever, because any flawed trait of Mal's is going to be jumped on by the fandom, and they're going to point to any type of flaw and say, see, he's a misogynist, he's a terrible person, he's an abuser, he's codependent on Alina, he's controlling of her. And instead of acknowledging that characters contain multitudes and that it's okay to have a flawed character, they can grow or they can just be flawed, that doesn't make them a bad person or a bad character. It's just, writing your characters with flaws is actually a good thing, but I'm afraid that the TV show is going to really lean hard on trying to make Mal a perfect person who doesn't have any flaws and who is unequivocally, perfect. And that makes me sad, because one of the reasons I love the Crows so much is because they're incredibly flawed characters. Kaz is a straight up fucking asshole, man. He is an asshole. But I love it. Because it's an interesting character. Now, do I want Mal to be like Kaz? No, I don't. I don't at all. But letting Mal have some flaws, like being overprotective of Alina, being afraid for Alina, like, all the time. Those flaws, I feel like if the people in this show write them into Mal, those flaws are going to be leapt on by book readers, and they're going to crucify Mal and completely reject any of his good qualities for saying, well, now we have a single flaw that we can latch onto and extrapolate from and blow way out of proportion and pretend like Mal is the most terrible, abusive, misogynistic, controlling character that has ever existed in the world. Which is frustrating, to say the least. Because while Mal is very protective of Alina, and much of his storyline explicitly revolves around helping Alina, he is strung up for it by the book community, whereas other characters who that is also their goal, is to only help Alina, like Tamar and Tolia, they're not punished for it by the book reading community. They see Tamar and Tolia as perfectly fine, even though they're literally zealots who are obsessed with worshiping Alina. Like, they're not bad, but Mal is? It doesn't make sense to me. But that is a video for another day, and here we are at the end. After I have talked all about Malyen Oretzev, gotten on my soapbox, got on my soapbox in the Alina video, got on my soapbox in this video. I might get on a little soapbox in the Darkling video, but I feel like I've covered most of my soapboxy things in these two videos. So I know many of you are probably going to hate my opinions about Mal, not feel too great that I don't think that you guys are treating him fairly in your views of book Mal, but that's okay. These are my opinions. I feel strongly about these opinions as you do yours, but I do hope that you got something out of the video. Maybe you are capable of seeing him in a different light than you had before. And I think, though, is he my favorite character of all time? No. But I do think that Malyen Oretzev deserves a lot more respect put on his name, especially book Mal, than is currently being given to him. So there you have it. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you do stick around for my Darkling video. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and happy writing.